everyone. So I can start by introducing us. I'll introduce myself and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. I am Samantha Strader. I am the program manager for our Delta grant here at the Tennessee Coalition. And the Delta grant specifically focuses on domestic violence prevention work. My background is I have about 10 years of direct services work in both domestic and sexual violence. I'm very passionate about this work and about creating safer and more just worlds for all of us. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic today, and I think that it has a lot of really great information. And I will pass it on to Lizzie.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Lizzie Rice. I am a DOH program specialist. In my position, we focus on the primary prevention of sexual assault. Previously, I worked as a paralegal for victim services, free legal clinic for victim survivors of both domestic and sexual assault. And I also have worked on the other side as a paralegal to criminal defense attorneys. So I have a pretty unique perspective of at least the judicial aspects of domestic and sexual violence. So I'm happy to be here with all of you today. And I will pass it to Takara.
Hi, everyone. I am Takara Wilson, and I am the other half as the prevention specialist for the Delta team. And my experience, I always say that I've worked with ages from 0 to 101. And in every stage or phase of life, it seems that IPV does or can play a factor. And so it's really nice to be on the prevention side as opposed to just the reactive side that I think a lot of us come from. And I will go ahead and get us started into healthy relationships by just
Real
going
quick,
over. Go ahead.
Did you guys see my themed mug?
Oh yeah, Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day and healthy relationships. Sorry. Go ahead.
You should have told us all. We could have.
Oh, Takara, do you want to have do we want to have Renee introduce herself?
I'm sorry, Renee. Yes, please do.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not able to show my video. I'm having computer issues this morning, but my name is Renee Satterwhite, and I'm with the Tennessee Department of Health. And my role is the Rape Prevention Education Program Director, where I oversee the Rape Prevention Education Grant funded through the CDC. I've been working in public health for about 5 years. I first got my start in doing sexual violence prevention as an intern at the University of Mississippi, where I assisted with the Green Dot program, where I helped that campus become a Green Dot campus. And also I worked on the local level as a public health educator, where I was able to teach young people about healthy relationships too as well. So I really enjoy being in the community and also helping to build health equity within different populations.
Thanks, Renee. Sorry for skipping over you. And I will go ahead and just take us into the objectives that we have for today's training. The first is the definition of what dating violence actually is. We'd also like to go over just having you have an understanding of the prevalence and the scope of teen dating violence. We'd like for you to gain some insight into dating violence and the way it impacts our youth, and also how to empower youth to set boundaries in relationships, how to identify warning signs of unhealthy relationships. And then last but not least, we'd like to close with giving you guys some resources if you are aware of any youth that are actually experiencing dating violence currently, or maybe if you come into contact later with youth who experience dating violence. Okay, so what is dating violence? First and foremost, dating violence can take place in person, online, and through technology. And what I mean by technology is just simply like through the use of a cell phone. Physical violence is a part of dating violence that I think we all kind of go to first. It's the easiest for us to understand from a definition standpoint. And it's just when a person hurts or tries to hurt a partner by hitting, kicking, or using another type of physical force. And again, that's the one that I think stands out probably the most to us all. Next, sexual violence, and it's forcing or attempting to force a partner to take part in a sex act or sexual touching when the partner does not or cannot consent. And I think it's really important to highlight that cannot consent, because the absence of no is not the presence of a yes. And I think that is really important to highlight. I think we've all seen previously in a lot of like high profile cases where, you know, that comes into question of the person didn't say no, but they also didn't say yes because maybe they weren't in a position to be able to speak. They were passed out or whatever the case may be. So please, if you don't remember anything else from this particular slide, for me, it's just remembering and making sure that our youth remember that the absence of a no is not the presence of a yes. Sexual violence also includes non-physical sexual behaviors, like posting or sharing sexual pictures of a partner without their consent or sexting someone without their consent. I think a few years back, we started to see like in the media, a lot of things about the like revenge porn that was coming up a lot in the media, where people were sharing the pictures or videos of ex-partners. And I've seen and read a lot about moving away from that term of revenge porn because it kind of gives off the idea that someone deserved it or the victim had it coming just simply by using the word revenge. And so we have to really be careful about that and victim blaming in that way. And another form of teen dating violence is psychological or emotional aggression. And this is the use of verbal and nonverbal communication with the intent to harm a partner mentally or emotionally and or exert control over a partner. So doing things like taking something that your partner may be self-conscious about and using it against them, making jokes in front of other people, always bringing it up in front of other people as a way to belittle them. This can happen online. We see that a lot with our youth through the use of social media and bullying in that way. And just simply embarrassing someone. If I'm a little bit self-conscious about my ears and Samantha takes the opportunity to bring that up all the time, that's a form of psychological or emotional aggression as well. And last but certainly not least is stalking. And stalking is a pattern of repeated unwanted attention and contact by a person that causes fear or concern for one's own safety or the safety of someone close to the victim. And when I think about stalking as it pertains to youth, I also think about how difficult it may feel for you to be able to like prove something like that or, you know, have someone believe them, because if they're involved in teen dating violence and they're being stalked, there's a really good chance that the person that's stalking them, the perpetrator, is someone that they're around all the time anyway, because it's going to be someone that they might go to school with. That person might be in their classes. That person could be a part of an after-school group that they're a part of, or even play like on the same sports team as them. And there's so many excuses for that stalker to use and say, oh, well, I was on my way to class. I had to pass that person's classroom to get there. I'm not deliberately following them or things like that. And then when we're talking about our young adults who may be college age, think about how difficult that could be if that person lived in their dorm. And, you know, how hard it would be for them, you know, to feel safe or to prove that this is happening.
So I'm going to talk about the power and control wheel briefly. So this is, if anyone is familiar with the power and control wheel that we typically use with victims, this is one that's more specific to teens. And I really wanted to point out that though, as Takara stated, what we think of when we say abuse or abusive relationships is often physical violence or physical abuse, but really the core of an abusive relationship is power and control. It's one person trying to have that full control over another person, and they will extort that control in many different kinds of ways. So it's much more than just physical violence. Using social status for teens, especially, like social status and coolness points, like, is huge. So making fun of someone in groups and saying, I'm just joking, why can't you just take a joke? Like, those kind of things are very harmful and more prevalent. Isolating you, telling you who you can and can't be friends with, where you can and can't go, how you should and shouldn't dress. And that can be as like outright as you can't wear that or you can't hang out with them, to a little bit more subtle of like, oh, is that really what you're going to wear right now? You know, and then that makes you feel like really bad, and then you're less likely to do that. So it can be kind of sneaky, kind of hard to catch. Violating privacy, I think we're going to talk about this later too, is demanding passwords to your social media accounts or to your phone and looking through your phone. That's really common. We see that a lot. Limiting your independence in any way. Threats. This is a big one for me, is the denying, minimizing, and blaming. So anytime that something comes up, then it's, oh, it's not my fault. If you hadn't made me so mad, then I wouldn't have done X. Or if you hadn't flirted with that person, then I wouldn't have gotten jealous, right? Like, it's always the victim's fault, to the point that the victim starts to believe that. So all of these are warning signs, and they're all part of, they can be used systematically to attempt to control the partner. And I think that this is a really great tool. So you can use this tool with your teens, or, you know, with people that are in your life or that you're working with or advocating for, as a form of empowerment, so they can start to recognize these things as actually forms of abuse, even though many of them are very normalized in our culture and in our society.
Yeah. Oops. There we are. So just to reiterate what Takara and Samantha have been saying, a lot of times when we talk about intimate partner violence, specifically sexual violence, we are probably thinking of or referring to specifically physical violence. But sexual violence is so much more than that. And oftentimes it can be really hard to see. It can be physical, obviously. But it can be emotional and psychological, and it can really live within our social norms. So this pyramid shows how language and things that we might see as normal, or, you know, things like jokes or locker room talk, how those can create stereotypes that lead to violence, and how our attitudes and preconceived notions about sex and sexual violence, as well as acceptance of traditional and oftentimes harmful gender norms, create an environment that's indifferent to physical acts of sexual violence. So the way we talk about it and how we talk about sex in general is really important to understanding how sexual violence lives within our culture.
I'm going to talk about stats, but before I did that, I wanted to mention Deborah in the chat mentioned that she hears from victims all the time that they think it's their fault. And I wanted to highlight that that is very, very common and is part of that cycle of control, right? It's part of, if you can make the victim believe it's their fault, then they're less likely to leave or less likely to stand up for themselves. So that is so common, and it's really, really damaging and really, really hard for victims. So I wanted to jump into some stats. Just so that we can understand that this is a prevalent issue that it impacts, if it hasn't impacted you, it probably has impacted someone that you know. Nearly 1 in 11 females and about 1 in 14 male high school students report having experienced physical dating violence just in the last year. About 1 in 8 females and 1 in 26 male high school students report having experienced a sexual dating violence experience in the last year. And 26% of women and 15% of men who have been victims of violence, physical stalking, sexual violence, by an intimate partner in their whole lifetime, their first experience of that was before the age of 18. So we're looking at, this is highly prevalent at younger ages than what we typically think about and talk about. So I think that's why these stats are important to know and to think about. And this has a big impact on people. This can look like kids who are not doing as well in school, or that their attendance starts to drop. They start to feel unsafe. They might engage in more risky behaviors like binge drinking or smoking or using drugs as kind of like a coping skills. They're trying to cope with the PTSD symptoms that they're feeling. Attempted suicide, developing negative body images, being uncomfortable with their sexuality, being overly dependent on others, not achieving independence. Violence in relationships sets the stage for problems in future relationships, as makes sense, right? We're setting a pattern of violence in relationships. And again, because it's been so normalized, maybe it's normalized in their lives or just in our culture and media, violence is normalized. So this has a big impact on people's physical and mental, emotional well-being. And those impacts start to have this cyclical thing where they start to impact each other, right? If I'm feeling sad and angry and anxiety and I'm having nightmares and flashbacks, then it makes sense that I'm going to have more absences from schools. I'm going to be more tired. I'm going to start to experience financial strains from court costs, or, you know, not being able to go to my job if I can't do that, which is then going to, you know, impact my emotions because I am feeling stressed about not being able to pay my bills. And then I'm having these physical symptoms too of headaches and neck aches and nausea and chronic fatigue. So all these things like impact each other and start to make each other worse and worse. So we're experiencing the negative effects of this like exponentially. They grow and grow and grow until we're able to start to heal from this. It's really, really causes just a horrible experience for people.
I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned, Samantha, just about when youth are experiencing this and they use other things to cope, or there's issues in school. A lot of times we can't help what we don't know about. And those types of youth get labeled with different diagnoses, and that's not at all even the problem that they're experiencing. And it's simply because we don't know what's happening with them, because it's oftentimes kept a secret.
Yeah, the worst is then imagine that you're in those shoes and you're getting punished on top of that, right? You're getting like sent to ISS, or you're getting, you know, whatever.
Suspended or labeled with a diagnosis.
Yes, yeah.
And along with that comes treatment that youth often don't even need, because we don't know what the real problem is.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brings us into why do youth keep dating violence a secret? Like, why aren't they sharing? And this is not by any means a comprehensive list, but some of the reasons that a lot of people have seen, and I've seen in my own work, is that they tend to be inexperienced with dating and relationships. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what a relationship is really supposed to look like. And as we're seeing youth become involved in relationships at an earlier age, they have no experience. They don't know yet what's right and wrong. They haven't, you know, fully developed good decision-making skills. There are romanticized views about love. Goes back to just kind of what we see in our own society, whether that be through, you know, movies that we see where there has to be a little bit of drama or turmoil in the relationship to make it real, or, oh, this person doesn't really care about me or love me, if there's not some type of turmoil that's happening. And so, they romanticize those types of things. Feeling pressure from their peers to be in a relationship, even though they're not ready. Those relationships are starting younger and younger, and there's that pressure because your friend group is in a relationship that you feel like you might have to have a partner too and start dating too. And also there's a desire to be independent from their parents. Being in a relationship makes them feel grown up. It's just that simple. They feel like adults. They feel like they have new responsibilities. And it may come at a time where there already is some rebellion anyway. So pulling away from those parents and clinging to that partner is right on time for youth at some point. And also, one thing that I wanted to add is sometimes outside of just romanticizing these things based on movies that they see, is they may not have experience with healthy relationships in their personal lives, whether that be, in their families or in their homes. They don't have a template. So they don't know that these behaviors are inappropriate or these behaviors are red flags.
I think it's worth bringing up too, again here, the idea of shame and how silencing shame can be, right? Like if you're the victim and you've come to believe that it's your fault or that you've caused it in some way, you are so much less likely to come forward. And if you love this person and you just want this person to be better, right? Like you're hoping, there's this hope that it's going to get better.
And you don't want to get them in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why people, I think, keep this a secret, especially teens.
Absolutely. We could talk about these things all day, but I think it's always really important to hear from those who have experienced some of these things. So we have a video that we want to show you guys, just from the perspective of some teens who have experienced dating violence. If this video feels like something that you need to step away from, please do. The video is about 2.5 minutes long. So if you need to step away and take a minute, we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes.
My teen dating experience began at a very young age. There was a boy, and I was in middle school.
And right when I saw her, I knew I'm gonna date that girl.
He was very nice. He would compliment me. He said that he really liked me. He was mysterious. We met and fell in love all within a matter of 2 weeks. And things kind of started.
Instant gut feeling that she was not good for me. I didn't listen to that gut feeling, and that was where it first went wrong.
He started controlling me and telling me what I could wear and what I couldn't wear. You need to text me at all times. I need to know where you're at all times.
It began to be emotionally and mentally manipulative.
He would start asking me if I could use my friend's phone to send him nude pictures. I will tell my girlfriend, oh, that's good. He's jealous, right? That means he really likes me.
She degraded me with names. Why are you being such a Why are you being such a Pretty soon you start believing that about yourself. And so then I began to act that way. I began to let her walk all over me.
Day after day, he constantly asked me, can we have intercourse? Can we have intercourse? Can we have sex? And I said, no. It really felt as if being controlled meant that he loved me. I thought that's just how relationships were supposed to be. You're not smart enough. You will never make it in life. You will end up just like your mother, cleaning houses. He knew how to put me down. He proceeded to throw me down on the ground again, and he put his forearm across my throat and spit in my face. Get off of me. I don't want this. He put all of his body weight on me and just finished his job. He had just finished raping me. I don't know. It's just you find yourself in the situation and you don't even realize how bad it is.
I thought that stereotypically that the men were the abusers and the women were the victims, but I never thought about teens. I never thought about young people. I felt stuck. I felt like I didn't have a voice.
So what do you guys think?
I've watched that video a couple of times now, and it never doesn't like give me chills to hear them kind of talking about this in their own voices and their own experiences, and
Yeah.
it's powerful.
A lot of that's really hard to hear. I think something that really struck me was, I believe it was one of the young women that was saying like they were controlling me, but I thought that was normal. Like I thought that's how relationships were supposed to be, and that's how they showed they cared. And that's, pretty striking. And yeah, this is why it's so important that we talk about the healthy aspects of relationships and what they're supposed to look like at a young age. So these kinds of things don't happen.
Yeah, that
I
jealousy and
noticed-
controlling behavior is so normalized. Even the other female too was like,
Yeah.
oh, he's jealous, that means he loves me.
Yes,
Mhm.
and I noticed where the young man said that he mentioned that he ignored,
Mm-hmm.
all the signs. He ignored them, and I think we're all guilty of that, even adults. When we
Yeah.
want something, we ignore the signs.
We do, or we rationalize them.
Yes.
And like he was saying, also another thing that kind of goes back to the harmful gender norms is like, oh, well,
Mhm.
the man's not the abuser. It's or I'm sorry, opposite. It's not usually the man, or the man is generally viewed as the abuser, and the women or a woman
Are
is the victim.
victims.
Yeah, and that's really harmful too, because that's something that creates a barrier to seeking help and
Yes.
reporting, and the shame, like what Samantha was talking about earlier about being, shamed into silence.
This
Mhm.
doesn't happen to men.
Yeah.
So there's that shame. I noticed that it seemed like I believe someone mentioned middle school. I think or maybe that could be a different video, but it's happening earlier. And I just think back to when I was in middle school. I don't think relationships were on my radar at all, the way that they are now for some youth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything in the
I was gonna say, if anyone has anything to add in the chat is open too. Yeah, Megan is saying that we're given these messages at such a young age. It's so common to hear. Oh yeah, even on the playground, oh, he's being mean to you, that means he likes you.
Absolutely.
Oof. It's harmful. So changing these things is so important as we're thinking about prevention and creating healing environments for people. When we hear those things, can we stand up to that? Can we say like, actually, when you like someone, you're kind to them, you take care of them, you don't harm them, Can we start to work against some of these things that have been so normalized? I hope the answer is yes.
And when you said that, Samantha, the first thing I thought of was boys will be boys.
Yeah. Oof.
Those types of things.
Yeah.
So obviously, guys, this video, it is a little heavy. And it is a topic that can be kind of difficult to discuss with youth. I think sometimes as adults, we're probably a little bit more uncomfortable with it than they are. When we've done healthy relationship presentations in the past, this is one of the slides that we've used to talk to youth about relationships. And it's just an introductory slide about the different types of relationships. And we found that it's pretty helpful. They relate to it pretty well. We've used it with middle school age all the way through high school. And it seems to start a lot of conversation because we used examples that are pretty popular no matter your age. I know these things are popular with me as an adult as well. And we've used the example from Lion King with Timon and Pumbaa to describe relationships being people that you meet and choose to be with, usually due to common interests or circumstances. For family relationships, we have talked about the Avengers as being people that you are either related to by blood or people that you choose to become family with. And then for romantic relationships, we have used the example of Frozen. Feel free to change out some of these examples, but these are some of the ones that seem to register when we've talked to youth and really started a lot of conversation around these types of relationships.
If I can add, I think that Frozen is such a good example because it takes the Disney stuff that was real problematic of like, we met and we're suddenly in love, which is technically called love bombing and is a tactic of abuse, right? So they've taken that and put it in their movie as deliberately to show that it's harmful. Because when Anna first meet the guy who's like, we finish each other's sandwiches, it turns out he's trying to kill her. Like he's abusive. And it's actually this guy that like they have a friendship first and it develops slowly over time. And that's what becomes the healthy relationship. So I think Frozen really deliberately tried to do a good job of showing warning signs of abusive relationships as opposed to what could develop into a healthy relationship. So I was happy to see that happen, and I'm happy to talk about that with kids. And it's a way in for them; they get it. They get that difference in Frozen.
And really, Frozen, I think you could probably just use that one movie for all three types of relationships. Like all three of the types are represented very well in that movie.
Yeah, you've got sisters and friends, and everybody's in there.
Mm-hmm. So, understanding relationships. These are also some of the questions that you could use to start a conversation with youth and just kind of help to gauge and see what they already know. A lot of times I think they know more than we as adults give them credit for. And so these are just kind of some conversation starter questions that you could use if you're needing to discuss relationships and have those intro conversations with youth. What does it mean to be in a relationship? Often, whether it's wrong or right, they have an idea. And so they may just need you to kind of fill in some gaps, but they have an idea whether they've gotten that idea from modeling in their homes or in a lot of cases from their friend groups. One that I really, really like is sex a requirement in a relationship? And is a relationship a requirement for sex? So what are those expectations? What do you guys think?
I think that these are important questions and we can't shy away from them, I guess, like we need to be careful, I guess, of setting, if I'm in a certain setting, I might not be able to ask some of these in as
Right.
open a way. But wherever I'm able to, I try to, and asking them open-ended, I think is a really great way to get kids talking, because if you're just asking like yes or no questions or like, do you know about whatever, do you know about safe sex?
Yeah.
Then
They're going to shut down.
Yeah. But if you try to like, what do you already know about this? What are you already learning about this? And what are you curious about? Is there anything that you want to know more about? Maybe I don't have to tell you, but I can like help you find resources or help you find information, because TikTok may not be the place you want to learn about some of this stuff. So I think in my experience, it's been good to have open conversations that are led by where they like meet them where they are. Where are they? What do they already know? And how do we let them lead that conversation from there? I think is a really great way to do it.
And questions like these to include, what does flirting look like? I think it is a good place to start an open conversation about consent and what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I was even when I feel like teens try to make things a joke, especially younger teens try to make everything like a joke. And I was just recently having a conversation like this with a younger teen. And I was like, what do you already know about dating? And he was like, not very much, but I do know you have a girlfriend. You don't tell your other girlfriend about that girlfriend. And I was like, well, let's talk about that, because now we can talk about trust, and we can talk about open communication, and we can talk
And
so there was a
honesty.
way in. Yeah. So there was a way in to actually, but he was joking, but there was a way in there to like talk about, what would you want in a partner? Do you want them to be trustworthy? Like, so it still was a way in, whereas I could have just like rolled my eyes and shut it down, but instead I was like kind of rolled with it. So I think we also kind of have to roll with whatever their style is and whatever they're gonna do, and it's unpredictable.
Absolutely unpredictable. And I think that it's important to know your audience. I wouldn't say to start this conversation with a team that you're mentoring on the first meeting when you're introducing yourself. Like, this is not the time to introduce these things. So definitely make sure that you have a rapport with the young person.
Yeah. I wanted to talk briefly about spheres of influence, because it's important, I think, for us to understand that teens are really in a transitional period from the influence primarily being from the family of origin or whoever the primary caregivers are, into more peer-led relationships and peer influences. So the microsystem, think of it as like, what's the closest level of impact? And that still is the family of origins, beliefs and cultures, but it really starts to be the close peers start to really, really influence how teens are learning about relationships, how they're thinking about relationships, what they know about relationships. And then from that little bubble, they also exist within this larger bubble that includes the internet culture, TikTok, the things that they're seeing on YouTube, their school environment, like are their school policies that are helpful or unhelpful? What are they getting? What kind of messages are they getting from teachers and coaches? Are the coaches influential in trying to shut down locker room talk, or are they, not? Like, those kind of things are also going to impact how they're understanding relationships and all these issues. And then they, like the rest of us, exist in this larger sphere where media and movies and our community and neighborhoods, how is dating viewed, in your larger community and neighborhood. And then our culture, our larger cultural beliefs about relationships, which is where we get, all these messages about, a man's role or a woman's role, like normal dating and jealousy. All those messages are like hitting us all the time. So teens exist also in these different layers of influence. And the closer that they are, the stronger that the impact can be. So this is where we're looking at, like, if you are, in that first two kind of bubble space, can you have an impact that starts to work against some of these cultural norms? Or can you do something that increases their sense of their own autonomy or their responsibility, or, any of those things that's going to help them feel more confident and more able to be safe? And we'll talk a little bit more later about resilience and how to build resilience. So just as we're thinking about spheres of influence, it's kind of like, if you're in those spheres, that matters. And just to know that the peers are huge for teens.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about consent. And I think a lot of the time when we hear the word consent, or talking about it in conversation, it most likely revolves around sex or sexual activity. But consent is so much more than that. And it applies to all types of relationships. But also I want to touch on self-efficacy, because self-efficacy reflects confidence in the ability to exert control over one's motivation, behavior, social environment, et cetera, et cetera. So how does that impact consent? Well, if someone feels confident in their ability to have an impact on their social environment, they're more likely to speak up on their own behalf and assert healthy boundaries. And they're also able to handle rejection well, which is really important, especially at this age. They also know to ask for what they want and especially when that requires vulnerability. They also trust their own body cues and act accordingly, and also trusting their instincts when it comes to other people's body cues accordingly. So there are a lot of different components when it comes to consent. And an easy way to remember them is FRIES. And I made this little graphic, but I will admit that it was heavily influenced by Planned Parenthood's graphic. So when you're talking about consent, you kind of want to let the person you're talking to, specifically when we're talking about teens, kind of lead the conversation and ask them how they feel about it and what these things mean to them. So an easy way to remember the components are freely given. That means that it's not under the influence of coercion, that it's reversible. And sometimes I get a lot of questions about that one, like how is it reversible? It means that there aren't any expectations and that you can withdraw consent at any time, whether you've actually had sex before or some sort of sexual activity, or even up to the point or in the middle of sex. You can reverse it. You can say, I'm not comfortable with this. We need to stop. It's also informed. You know exactly what you're consenting to. Consent to one thing is not consent to another. It's also enthusiastic. It's very clear that the person is consenting because they want to. And it's also specific. You know exactly what you're consenting to. If someone says they're going to use a condom or birth control, then you have to use a condom or birth control. You can't change your mind at the last minute. You need to be honest and communicate that. So that leads us into boundaries within relationships. We can go to the next slide. So there are lots of different types of boundaries. And adolescence is a time of enormous physical and emotional change. During this time, kids are seeking greater independence and exploring new identities, and learning these concepts early on. What healthy relationships look like ensures that the teens will have those skills that they need in adulthood. So boundaries can look different for different people in different types of relationships, but I'm going to talk about 4 specific ones today. So the first one is emotional boundaries. And emotional boundaries apply to the space and time that you spend with each other. While spending time with a partner is great, it's also important to have space that allows them to be their own autonomous person with their own interests, their own hobbies, things like that. It also encourages a person to maintain their own sense of identity while still being a couple, and that fosters independence and strength. Then the L word in open communication, and this kind of goes back to what Takara was talking about with this kind of like romanticized idea about love. But saying I love you can happen at different times for different people in a relationship. And teens who are in relationships and maybe in a relationship for the first time should understand that it's okay to not feel ready to express or communicate their feelings in that way, but still appreciate the vulnerability that it took for someone to say that to them, or the vulnerability it took for them to say it to someone else. So on the other hand, no one should expect or pressure their romantic partner into feeling that same way. And no one should feel bad or guilty for either side. We can go to the next slide. So time apart. Time apart is a pretty significant boundary, and it's important to learn early on. So as great as it is to want to spend a lot of time with partners, it's also really important to have time away from each other. You should always feel free to hang out with friends or family without having to get permission. And that applies to friends of any gender. You should feel comfortable to have your own autonomy, your own interests, like we were talking about before. And the last boundary I'm going to talk about today is digital boundaries, which is a big one. We've kind of touched on that a little bit throughout the presentation, but I saw a documentary, I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a social psychologist, and he made this statement, and he made this probably in the early days of the internet, right when access to being online was becoming more and more prevalent. But he was talking about how the face-to-face social interaction was sort of the genuine connection that we had. And socializing online, if y'all are my age, you remember AOL Instant Messenger and all that stuff, that was the awkward interaction. But he predicted within 20 or 30 years, the opposite would be true. And boy, oh boy, I think he was onto something, because we are living so much of our social lives, especially teens, online. So it's important to establish and talk about those boundaries now, with that being a pretty significant part of our social lives, specifically with teens. So it can be kind of hard to know where the line is. So communication is really key here. If you're talking to teens about what kind of boundaries they want to set, you're probably going to want to encourage them to ask themselves some questions like, how do I feel about my partner posting about me on social media? What kinds of posts am I okay with? Am I okay with my partner having access to my phone? And am I comfortable with my partner sharing texts or pictures that I've sent them? And once they've kind of had that internal dialogue and asked themselves those questions, they'll be more comfortable and prepared to have a conversation about boundaries. So another thing we talked about, and this is kind of a tricky area, because I am 35 years old and I do not understand why anyone would want to share passwords with each other. But again, I'm 35, I'm from a different era. So when we're having these conversations, we kind of want to keep in mind that we don't want to set any hard rules or hard boundaries. We want to let the teens and the youth that you're speaking with kind of have the autonomy and the agency to come to these conclusions on their own with the right tools and the right mindset. When it comes to sharing passwords, which again, I don't completely understand. I share my Netflix password with people all the time, but that's about the extent of my password sharing history. But this is something that's really important that requires a lot of conversation. And once, someone comes to a conclusion and understands how they feel about it, it's going to be easier to have that conversation. And it really comes back to trust. And having that time apart and not monitoring each other. So I'm 35 and my husband has access to mine. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. And again, I think it's personal preference. And I'm also not very active on things like Facebook or anything. So that's why it's important to have conversations about it. And it does go back to trust. You're absolutely right.
I think it's important too to think about, like, if we think about consent again, right? Like, is that password freely given? Is it given openly and fully within intentionality? That's different than a partner demanding access.
What is the intent?
Right? Yeah,
absolutely.
So I think that that's something to bear in mind too. Is the idea of consent and versus power and control. I think it matters there.
Absolutely.
And that consent. I think that consent is ongoing.
Yeah.
I am an adult and my partner still asks, like, hey, what do you think about this picture? I was going to post this to Facebook, before posting a picture. So I think the consent in that way is not something that, oh yeah, you can post about me and then they're just free to post anything that they would like.
Exactly. Yes. I agree with all of that. And me personally, I come from a totally different mindset, and my mind is like cybersecurity. But again, it's just, if both or all partners are comfortable with it, I don't see that there's a problem. It's just exactly what we were just talking about. When it's a demand, when there's a reason to not trust someone, if that's implicated, that's when you start to raise red flags. Which, speaking of which, red flags, that moves us into our next section.
Yeah, I think about it in context with some of these red flags, right? Like
Exactly.
if someone is asking for my password so they can monitor who I'm texting, or
Right.
like I need to know what who's talking to you on Facebook, like that fits into jealousy and controlling behavior. You know?
Absolutely.
Like that's in context with other behaviors, it matters a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate everyone's input and because this is like, has to be a conversation. There are no really hard and fast rules when it comes to this. And also it's so new. It's evolving. We're still figuring this out. So yeah, conversation is really important when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about red flags and green flags. You've probably heard of red flags before. And those are like cues or signals that might pop up that make you reconsider some things, or maybe they're warning signs. Some examples of those are being overly jealous. If someone tries to control what you wear, who you talk to, who you're friends with, checks your phone, demands passwords to social media. We just talked about that, obviously. If they're mean to you, if they call you names or put you down, even if they brush it off as, oh, it's just a joke, I'm just playing with you. If they always blame others for their actions, that's a pretty big red flag. They won't do any self-reflection or take responsibility. And again, like self-reflection is how we grow. We're all going to mess up in relationships and do things that maybe we regret, or say things we regret. But the important thing is having that open line of communication and understanding, and then doing some self-reflection. If they're not willing to do that, that's a pretty big red flag. Also, if they lose their temper often and unpredictably, that's also a red flag. So red flags, we talked about red flags, but what are the green flags? That's not something that we talk about as often. We talk about the warning signs, the bad things, but what about the good things? So green flags can look like when someone trusts you, when they say nice things about you to their friends and family, when they're kind to animals or younger people or people that they may have, where there may be an uneven power dynamic. It really matters how you treat people when you're in a position of power. I think that's probably a really big indicator of someone's character, is how they treat people when they didn't have to be nice or treat them nicely. They also respect your privacy. And they take responsibility for their actions, right? Like we were just saying, they take responsibility for their actions and they apologize sincerely. Also, their actions meet their words. They say what they mean and they mean what they say. So what are y'all's thoughts? What are some other green flags that y'all think that would make a healthy relationship?
I think that it can depend on your personality too, like what you value and what is important to you. But I think the biggest one for me is that all of those things about me feel safe with the person, right? Like safety is my number one green flag. Do I feel emotionally safe? Do I feel physically safe? Of course, but even emotionally safe and psychologically safe. So for me, the biggest green flag is safety.
Yeah, I agree with that. Being able to be vulnerable. That's so important, because that's how you express, that's how you make a genuine connection. It's being vulnerable and being genuine with each other. And if you feel like you can't do that with someone, that can have a pretty big impact on you psychologically, and the relationship.
Yeah.
I can be a creature of habit. And so I like the things that I like. I'm, pretty set in my ways, as some would call it. But I think it's really important when people respect that about you and aren't constantly just pushing you into things that you might not be comfortable with, saying, oh, it's good for you. You should try this new thing. It's good for you. And not respecting that might cause you, a bit of stress or anxiety by jumping into new things so quickly. And so I think it's a green flag when people respect that about you and, maybe introduce new things to you, but don't have an expectation of, oh, you have to do this new thing, or, you need to get out of your comfort zone.
Takara, I'm hearing you say respect your boundaries.
Yeah.
Respect your
Yeah.
nose and respect
Yeah.
your boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's true for any of us, you know, like if I have a boundary, then that should be respected. I think that sometimes people are uncomfortable with boundaries in relationships. You know, I think it's again been normalized that in relationships there aren't any boundaries, right? It
Yeah.
kind of says it's a bubble. We all have our bubble. We call it, you know. So
Yeah.
yes, and those exist in all relationships where we have a right to have those boundaries in relationships and to have those boundaries respected, for sure. So that can take us into healthy relationships. I like the end of this presentation kind of ends, I feel like in happier notes, because we've kind of talked about abuse and harm. And then this other side, I think is really important to talk, especially to teens about, or to anyone who is a survivor, that there is this other side, right? There's like this other side of the coin or the other side of the tunnel, that safe relationships, safe and healthy relationships really do exist. And there's kind of a model for it the same way there is for unhealthy relationships. So healthy relationships, again, are ones that feel safe. And the way that the power and control wheel, the abusive relationship was centered around control. The healthy relationship is centered around equity or equality or shared power. So it's this idea of not one person having dominance or control over the other, but the shared, more egalitarian kind of relationship. Even if that means that people have different roles, those roles are viewed equally and they have equal amount of power in the relationship. You're allowed to have friends that are in other close relationships. The person supports your goals and growth. Respective boundaries and open communication. All these things are occurring. Important decisions are made through negotiation and fairness, not one person having always the final say. No threatening behavior, everything feels safe. There's respect, there's trust and support, honesty and accountability. So I can come to you and say like, hey, this really hurt my feelings, or I'm really not okay with this. And that's received and heard, and solutions can be, you know, come to. I feel confident. I feel like I'm able to grow. I feel like I'm able to pursue things that make me better, my education, or, you know, a better job. You know, the person wants me. The person is like my cheerleader, wanting me to go and do those things. And then this idea of shared power, that we, even though we may have different roles, they're equal in their power in the relationship. And it's all held together by this idea of nonviolence. Our words are kind, our actions are kind, how we treat each other is kind. Even when we're angry, we can still be kind. I think that that's important. I also like to talk to teens about rights and responsibilities. Can you go back one? I think this is important for teens, but everyone really, but I really like to talk to teens about it. We all have, in every relationship that we're in, we have rights and responsibilities. So we have rights that are things like to be treated with respect, to enjoy our activities apart, to have my own feelings and thoughts, even if they're different than yours, to say no when I want to be safe, to be treated as an equal partner, to be comfortable being fully myself. And I also ultimately have the right to either leave or stay in the relationship. That is my right to decide if I'm going to be in this relationship or not. But I also have responsibilities, most of them meaning that I have to respect your rights as well. Like if I have those rights, then so do you. So I'm going to respect the person that I'm dating. I'm going to listen to their thoughts and feelings, even when they're different than mine. I'm going to give them space to have their own friends and activities that are separate from me. I'm going to compromise and take accountability for when I'm wrong and when I've caused harm. And I'm going to step forward and try to create healing there. I'm going to respect their privacy and let them have their space. And I'm going to respect that they also have a right to leave or stay in the relationship as they choose. So if I have these rights, I also have to respect those rights of the other person. And that's my response. I'm responsible for respecting those rights. And I like that language of talking about it in this way, because it's empowering. I feel like it's really empowering for me to say, like, I have this right and I can respect that right in others, and that's where healthy relationships really spawn from. Do you guys have thoughts or things to add to this at all? If not, I can move on.
No, you did a
I
great
think
job.
someone was just mentioning that it's a wonderful feeling to have these rights and also to have these responsibilities. I believe that's what the person is referring to.
Yeah, and to talk to victims about this. I agree.
Mhm.
I agree, because this is how, like, when you've been the victim of violence, right, you start to believe that you don't deserve healthy relationships and good treatment, and that they don't exist, right? It's like it's this imaginary thing that's not real and doesn't exist. And so to ground it really in, like, no, everyone deserves these kind of relationships. Every single person, including you, including me, including everyone. So really bringing it back to, like, there are ways to start to practice this, and you can start to practice it with friends, and you can start to practice it with coworkers and colleagues, right? You don't have to, like, jump straight into a romantic relationship to practice these things. You can start to practice it with family, with friends, with whoever's close to you. And then you start to build the skills for healthy relationships that then you can take into romantic relationships as well. But for a lot of people, like kids, adults, teens, I ask people, do you know any relationships like this? And the amount of times that I hear just people here say a flat no. Like, no, I don't know any relationships like this. I've never seen a relationship like this. So that's really hard. It's really like, if you don't have a blueprint, as we were saying earlier, if you don't have a blueprint for what a healthy relationship is, it can be really, really hard and really disheartening and really harmful in our hearts to have experienced violence and heal from that and believe that something like this is actually possible. So it is really important for us to talk. I agree. And I heard a thing. So we're going to talk about resilience, and this fits in with resilience. I heard a thing the other day that I might like, it might be my new mantra, right? It is this idea that preventative work and healing work is the same work. And we've been kind of thinking of them as separate things for a while now. But if you think about it, the tools that create environments where people can be safer from violence are also the same things that are going to help people heal from violence. Does that make sense? So like if we are able to create environments in which the culture and the norms are such that everyone knows about their rights and responsibilities and everyone is empowered in these resilient ways, they're going to be less likely to encounter violence in the first place. And if they have encountered violence, then they're going to be more likely to be able to heal from that. So the very same environments that prevent violence also create healing. Does that make sense? Like, I love this idea that it's the same work, it's the same environments, are both restorative and preventative in nature. So I want to think about that more, and I want to like take that into the work that we do of, it's the same. We're creating environments that are safe and healing. And we do that in all these building resilience factors. And these are specifically for teens, but I think that they kind of apply to everyone. So the first one is creating safer and more stable conditions. And that looks like being sexually, physically, emotionally, psychologically free from fear and harm. And I like that fear and harm are the words they use. And then we also, with that free from harm, we also have to have predictable and consistent positive experiences. So it's not just free from negative experiences, it's also like an increase in positive experiences. And then the social and cultural and spiritual connections is sustained relationships that give us a sense of connection or positive identity, of belonging and hope and belief, so that I think about the term resilient hope. I don't know if you guys have heard this term, but I love it. It's this idea that hope is not naive. It's not just like everything will turn out for the best. That's not what hope is. It's a deeply resilient feeling that good things are worth fighting for and worth trying for. And that without that idea of hope, we can't build anything in the future. That's like, we have to have that hope because it's what propels us into building for the future. So I like that idea. And I think that's what this is talking about is we need connections, social, cultural, spiritual connections that foster that sense of hope within us. Resiliency in a growth mindset is positive adaptations for problem solving and resourcefulness, that you believe in your own abilities to overcome challenges. It's really the idea that if something bad happens, that doesn't mean that I am a failure or I am bad, right? It just means that this is something that I am able to and can overcome, and that will help me be stronger. So that's the growth mindset part, is I can experience these things and it doesn't define me or life as a whole. It just is a moment and I can overcome that moment. Nurturing parent-child interactions, and the definition here includes parent or parent figures. So it's whoever is in the child's life or teen's life that functions as a caregiver in some way. And those being affectionate and patient and kind and caring, and where the person's needs are met with attunement, where I'm able to hear, even if you're having a meltdown and like cussing and whatever, I can try to attune to that and try to help and connect to that. And then the last one is the social and emotional abilities. So we're looking at being able to understand that I can set and achieve positive goals and feel and show empathy. So it's the knowledge and the ability to form these social and emotional connections. And this all comes from Futures Without Violence. Yes, I love them too. So these all come from Futures Without Violence. And I think that this is what we can be thinking of as we are thinking about both prevention and healing, is how do we build these environments and how do we talk to teens in a way that fosters these environments. And then our last slide is into resources. So we have us listed as a resource. You can visit our website. You can also, the last slide is going to have our contact information. You can contact us directly if you have any questions. There's the National Hotline. RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, as a hotline. We are running a campaign called BeTheFriend.org. It's specifically aimed at teens and young adults to help them feel empowered and to know what to do if they have a friend who's experiencing dating violence, to recognize the warning signs and know how to be supportive. Futures Without Violence is a wonderful website that has just a lot of information about how to get involved with prevention work. And Love is Respect is specifically geared towards teens and young adults. And this is our contact information. I think that we are able to send out this PowerPoint if anybody wants it, or if you want to take a quick screenshot of this, or if you want to write them down. We are all available to help answer questions if you have any. And we can hand it over now to Renee to talk to you a little bit more about prevention efforts.
Thank you, Samantha, Lizzie, and Takara. That was such a wonderful and very informative presentation. Let me see if I can try to share my screen. All right, can y'all see my screen pretty well? All right, thank you. My name is Renee Satterwhite, and I'm the Rape Prevention Education Program Director for the Tennessee Department of Health, and I oversee the Rape Prevention Education grant through the CDC. Today I'm just gonna go over just some sexual violence prevention strategies, and also some evidence-based programming that can help reduce teen dating violence within our communities. So first I'm gonna talk about the different types of prevention strategies, which includes individual relationship level and also community and societal level strategies. And so first I'm gonna start with individual relationship level strategies. With this one, it talks about teaching skills to prevent sexual violence. That can include teaching social emotional learning approaches. That includes teaching conflict resolution skills, teaching, bystander intervention skills, and also just have anger management too as well. The second one is teaching healthy, safe dating and intimate relationship skills to adolescents. So that's more so talking about identifying, what a healthy relationship relationship is and what an unhealthy relationship is. And also looking for those warning signs when it comes to an unhealthy relationship. Third is promoting healthy sexuality. So that means promoting consent in relationships. And the last one is empowerment-based training for women to reduce risk for victimization. So that is more so involving women to kind of assess their danger in an unhealthy relationship and being able to overcome those emotional barriers that may have them to stay in a relationship and being able to act to help keep them safe. Next, I'm going to talk about community level prevention. So with community level prevention, communities can include schools, workplaces, colleges, universities, and neighborhoods. This involves more so modifying the community and just looking at just trying to transform characteristics within that community. It also means creating protective environments, just making sure that the community is safe for everyone. Some examples of that includes improving and monitoring school safety. You may have students identify safe and unsafe areas of their school, and with that, they can increase monitoring in those unsafe places. Secondly, you have establishing workplace policies. That means creating policies related to addressing, sexual harassment in the workplace. And third, you have addressing community level risk through environmental approaches. So a community may identify they have a lot of alcohol related sexual assaults happening in that community. And so they may want to train bars and restaurant staff on bystander intervention skills. And all of these information can be found at the Stop Sexual Violence technical package to prevent sexual violence, which was created by the CDC. And so examples of some of these prevention strategies, on the individual relationship level, we have safe dates, coaching boys into men, athletes as leaders. And on the community level, we have shifting boundaries. And I'll talk more about this in the next slide. So at safe dates, it more so informs students on what a healthy relationship is and what an unhealthy relationship is. It's kind of like going back to what Samantha, Lizzie, and Takara's presentation was talking about, addressing those warning signs in an unhealthy relationship. It provides social emotional learning skills for students, learning those bystander skills, learning how to develop those healthy dating relationship skills, creating positive communication, learning how to deal with anger management, and also conflict resolution. This curriculum is done for middle school and high school students, and it can be done in 4 sessions, 6 sessions, or 10 sessions, but overall, the curriculum includes 10 sessions overall. Coaching Boys to Men is a very popular curriculum. This is created by Futures Without Violence. This program is meant for high school coaches to mentor and teach their young male athletes about healthy relationships. This can be incorporated in their regular coaching strategies, meaning that this can help with character building within those young male athletes. It provides training tools to model and promote respectful, nonviolent, healthy relationships. So equipping these young men to be models of being able to promote what healthy relationships looks like within all relationships they encounter. It's been shown to decrease negative bystander behavior and dating violence among male athletes and their peers. So they're able to take these skills that they learn with the Coaching Boys to Men and also take it on if they plan on doing any, collegiate sports in their future. It's also targeted toward high school male athletes, and there are 12 sessions overall, and they can be done 10, 15 minutes. They get these training cards where they'll just have to have a discussion about different topics that young men, pretty much go through. It can be about consent, it can be about, dating violence. It can be a number of topics that young men talk about, locker room talk, talking about intimate partner violence. So with these lessons, it's more so teaching them about healthy relationship skills. You can find the curriculum on coachescorner.org. And it's a really great resource for coaches to learn how they can implement this, and also for advocates to be able to reach out to those coaches and those schools about promoting this program. Next, you have athletes as leaders. This is kind of like the female version of Coaching Boys into Men. It's meant to empower female athletes to take an active role in promoting healthy relationships and ending sexual violence. So more so just having them role model and promote healthy relationships. It's meant to be implemented with Coaching Boys into Men. So say for instance, a school may have a baseball team that's doing Coaching Boys into Men. The coach or someone may want to do athletes as leaders with their softball team or even with their basketball teams. It's targeted toward high school female athletes, and it's also done for 15 to 20 minutes, weekly sessions. What they'll do is they'll just have a discussion about a topic, and then they'll have some discussion afterwards. Then they also kind of talk about how to apply what they learned within the lesson. And both the Coaching Boys and Athletes as Leaders has been done with middle school students too as well, and it's been known to have success within those populations too. But you can find more information about Athletes as Leaders on their website. It also provides the curriculum and just some training tools to get started with implementing this program within the schools. Lastly, I have Shifting Boundaries. This is a community level intervention. It comes in two parts. You have the classroom curriculum that talks a lot about, sexual harassment, about, teen dating violence. Then you also have the school-wide intervention that includes being able to have the students identify those safe areas and those unsafe areas. This is referred to as hotspot mapping. So they'll draw a map of the school and highlight those in red that are unsafe and highlight those that are in green as safe areas and highlight in yellow the cautionary areas. So they can take these maps and present it to their school board or to their principal and just like, hey, can we have some interventions around what the students have identified as unsafe areas of the school? And can we have any type of policies or extra monitoring of those areas within the schools? It's meant to reduce dating violence and sexual harassment among students. It highlights the consequences of this behavior in perpetrators. So they just have like if someone has experienced sexual harassment at the school, there's a conversation between the victim and the perpetrator to come up with a solution for the issue. And also with those hotspot mappings, you may want to increase surveillance of those unsafe school areas. And this is more so targeted towards middle school students. This is done within 6 class periods. And I know these slides will be shared out afterwards, but there's a webinar on preventconnect.org that talks a lot about the Shifting Boundaries program, which is highlighted at the bottom of this slide. So just some resources to share. I shared with you previously the coachescorner.org, where you'll find resources for both coaches and advocates to implement the Coaching Boys into Men program. I also would like to share that they also have a Coaching Boys into Men collaborative. They have monthly sessions that helps advocates and coaches kind of get started with Coaching Boys into Men. Some people may not feel comfortable approaching a team or a coach about this program, so they get some helpful tips on how you can introduce this to your school athletic director. And also just best practices. I know they had a couple of sessions that talks about doing this virtually. I know back in 2020, a lot of people were struggling with trying to implement this program within the school settings due to the schools being closed. But they also had a webinar that gave some best practices on how to do this virtually. You also have Athletes as Leaders too as well. They have a couple of videos that goes through the curriculum. They also just have a lot of toolkits for advocates and for mentors and coaches to learn more about the program and how this could be done within the school. Next, I have the Stop Sexual Violence, a technical package to prevent sexual violence, which is made by the CDC. So it gives a lot of great strategies and tips on how to prevent sexual violence and best practices on how communities can address these issues. And then lastly, we have the Tennessee's Reprovage Education Program website. This includes information about our evidence-based programs, just different resources about, teen dating violence or sexual violence. And it also includes our pre and post surveys for each of these programs. So if you would like to learn more about these evidence-based programs or interested to implement this within your community or your community setting, just please feel free to email me. My email address is renee.satterwhite@tn.org, and I'll be happy to, do a training with your organization on these programs, and also to help you get started with implementing this within your community. All right, thank you.
I think we can open it up to questions now, if anyone has any questions. Thank you, Renee, for that. I love those resources. It just gives me so much hope to know that there are things that are being done in our community to try to address these issues and empower our young people. It makes me feel old to say it that way, but does anybody have any questions or final comments?
I don't see any comments, but as Megan mentioned before, the full training will be available on the coalition's YouTube page soon.
And if anyone has any, oh, I see a raised hand. Would like a copy of the information. Yes, I think that I think we can send out the PowerPoints after this. I don't know if that addressed the hand that was raised. Thank you, Michaela. All right, well, we can go ahead and end this then. I give you guys a few minutes back. Yes, we can send this out, and thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for all the work that you do, and have a great rest of your day.